Welcome back to A Bite from the Money Sandwich, where we provide practical and easy to understand tips and ideas on how to manage your money better so as to let you retire with comfort and on your own terms. I always enjoy speaking to experts to discuss key money topics that will help us reach our retirement goal. But what happens when you hit retirement yourself? What we call year R. How do you prepare for it? Today I'm talking with my good friend, John Haslam, who is part of the sandwich generation like myself and many of you, who made the decision to retire at the end of last year. He'll speak about what led him to this, how he prepared financially, but importantly, how he addressed the mental psychological side of retirement that he wasn't quite ready for when making such a big change to his life. He also gives great tips on how to keep busy and challenged in retirement, as going from full-time work to zero is always going to be a bit of a shock to the system. Welcome, John.
Welcome, thank you.
And for the people who are just listening and can't see this, he's wearing his Manchester United shirt because I like Liverpool and John likes Manchester. So that always is a fun part of our conversations.
So we won't mention who's won the most trophies.
We won't, John. We won't. Before we start, about where you are now, maybe worthwhile to go back to that beginning and how a young boy from Manchester, who I imagine would never have thought of going to Oxford, migrating to Australia and marrying an Aussie girl, Victoria. So, John, maybe that's the good place to start. So tell me a bit about that time.
Okay. Well, my background, I was born in a small town just south of Manchester, not to a wealthy family, just a normal average family. And I was the middle child, which has all sorts of problems.
Yes.
I have an elder brother who was very successful at everything. And so, I was always referred to as his brother rather than myself, which I think in later years motivated me. Then a little sister. And of course, when she came along, that changed everything. So we went from renting a flat and not having a car. So we had to then buy a house and get a car to transport my sister around. And she's still referred to as the chosen one in the family. But I get on very well with her. So I think because my brother was so successful, initially I ignored that and didn't do very well. I managed to come 46th out of 48 in my class at school. Then decided perhaps that wasn't very good indeed, and I'd better pull my finger out. So I did, particularly the last 2 years of school, and worked very, very hard. And luckily from that got into university. And then from university, joined a big multinational as a management trainee. And I worked with them for a number of years in London, a couple of years in Canada. And then they sent me here to Australia. I've never been here before, but I thought, yeah, sounds like good. I'll go and have a bit of fun.
So probably just that. I like asking people, what was your conceptions of what Australia looked like or what you're expecting? Kangaroos down George Street?
No. I wasn't quite that dumb. I certainly expected spiders in my house all the time because friends sent me all these pictures and photos of spiders and said I have to watch out for them everywhere. The impression of Australia from then was very much a fun place. All the imagery you saw was summer, so constant sunshine. I arrived late May, and I have to say by August I was frozen because, of course, nowhere had central heating, and I wasn't expecting to be. So I hadn't packed any jumpers or coats or things like that, which I had to then go and buy. But the main thing about Australia it's just an adventure. Try something different, go and have a bit of fun. And that certainly happened because the very third week I was here, I met the girl who eventually became my wife. Totally unexpected and happened very quickly. And a couple of years later, we got married. And now we've got 3 very big grown-up boys.
Yeah, and one of the things is that you went into business together. That must have. I always find that interesting about working hand in hand all day as well as being together at night. How have you found that worked for you guys?
Well, it was interesting because before I was in the corporate world for a long time, and I decided I really wasn't set for the corporate world. I wasn't very good at office politics. I'd rather just get on with the job and get it done, be nice to people and expect people to be nice back to me, which of course doesn't happen in the big corporate world. So I left the corporate world and we started our own business. It actually worked very well. And I think we only had a couple of rows in the business in the 30 years we've been running it. And that's because I think we each did very different things. So we played to our strengths. So she looked after all the creative stuff, the visual stuff, the PR and so on. And I did what she called the boring stuff, which was the finance, the human relations, the contracts, the timetables, the plans, all the things that she called the boring stuff. So by dividing the work that way, it actually worked out very well.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a really good point, and not just for marriage, but in business. Yes, it's good to have people who have the ideas, but you also need the practical, the accounting, that side of it, the day-to-day, the detail person. Otherwise,
Yes.
no business will ever work out. And that's it. You went from growing a business, which was the Sydney weddings, but now this interesting period of your life where it obviously got to a point where you said there would have been a point, I'm working 6-7 days a week. I just want to start slowing down. And also your wife wanted to go into her own business venture. So that must have been different. But is there a point you can actually say, yeah, I've had enough. This is it. I want to slow down.
Yes. I think beginning of 2020, although I've been heading that way for a while, I decided that I definitely didn't want to keep working. With your own business, it really is 6-7 days a week. And, after 45 years of routine of getting up and being in the office by 8 o'clock and getting back at 7 in the evening, I thought, yeah, I've just had enough. I really want to stop working. I want to do my own thing. Some of the things I want to, I've been putting off, I'd like to do those. And I'd like to get out of the work routine. That coincided with my wife starting her new business. So that was quite interesting. Quite happy to help her doing things there when she needs me. But yes, quite a big change in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and no problem for a plug, because it's a super fast diet is what Victorian is doing very, very well. Even their latest book has just come out, three-day diet, I think it is.
3-day diet, yes.
But that's definitely Victoria's project. And yes, you're transitioning to retirement, I suppose. So that was the point. How long ago was that? Oh, you said 2020. So
Beginning of 2020.
So what steps have you done to sort of change?
I think because I knew the day was coming, you tend to try and plan, and you have a vision of what retirement will be like. And I guess, like most people, it doesn't actually turn out that way. But in the early days, I planned a number of different ways. Firstly, financial. Obviously, you want to make sure that you can be able to survive happily in retirement. And I decided a very long time ago, looking at the situation with all the baby boomers coming through, that we couldn't expect to get a government pension that would look after our retirement, that basically we had to look after our retirement ourselves. So once you make that decision, if you want to have a decent retirement, then you need to start planning ahead, quite a long way ahead, which we had done. So I set up self-managed super funds, which we managed, did all that. And then in terms of other plans for retirement, obviously you want to stay active. We're still mentally young, if not quite physically as young as we used to be. So I enjoy certain parts of exercise. So I plan, gym memberships, and I also do quite a lot of football refereeing, which gets me out and about and gets me even to be more thick-skinned than I need to be, perhaps. I also wanted to do more charity work. So I work with 3 or 4 different charities and try and help them. I find that very rewarding. I enjoy reading, and I certainly wanted to travel more. So we actually planned 4 separate trips last year, and all of them got scuppered by COVID. But the thinking was there that by a combination of being financially secure, exercise, charity work, reading, travel, and other hobbies and things, besides the jobs you've got to do, like tidy up the garage, which I still haven't done, I thought, retirement would be straightforward.
Yeah, okay. And I definitely want to get on to that point, because that's, when it actually does happen, for a lot of people, it is very different to what they think. But so that is interesting regarding, wanting to keep busy. It's not just about the financial. And that's one of the really key points that when I was seeing clients, that financial was just one aspect. It's that health, relationships, and what's going to keep your mind active. And, you pretty well seem to have covered off on all those points. But charity is an interesting one. I know a lot of people think about, well, I'd like to give back. I've done all right, I would just want to go in a different direction. What led you to that area?
I've always tried to help a few charities, but I was taken by some friends to a fundraising dinner a few years ago, for a charity called Stand Tall, which is set up by two excellent ladies on the North Beaches. And they were very concerned by the situation with youth suicide. So what they do is they run camps and big away days. We've just had one relatively recently. And they have students from years 8, 9, 10, 11. And we present for a day with a mixture of motivational speakers, fun music, activity. And the overall objective is to inspire hope into them and to make them realize that their situation is perhaps not as bad as they think it is. And by doing a few things, they can really look forward with a smile and with positivity. And it's amazing in one day, the last event we had over 6,000 students there, that we can really help turn these kids' minds around. It's hard work, helping in the charity, but you can use some of my skills. So my background is marketing, so I can do a lot of things in terms of helping them with organizing things, directing things, the marketing, the media, the PR, just the whole organization of it. And it's very, very rewarding. When you hear kids writing in saying, I was thinking of suicide and now I'm not, then that's brilliant. That's what we do it for.
It's powerful, isn't it? It's amazing going down that path, but a few people I've spoken to who have done that retirement say that it's actually a hard balancing act because it can actually be all consuming.
Yes, it can. So you have to learn to say no, as you do in everything in life. I could do a lot more work in the charity, but I've got to keep a balance, and I help a couple of other charities as well. So the last few years, because I'm very interested in football, I've helped with the team putting defibrillators into every sports ground in the Northern Beaches, and now we're much wider than that, trying to Sydney. And we know of 4 lives we've certainly saved. So, I might be the one that needs it next. That's always the back of your mind.
Yes.
But things like that, I think variety is very important. So I don't just work with one charity, work with a few, different times of the year, sometimes very, very, very busy. And other times, there's not much I need to do in that particular month or few weeks.
Okay, so and we definitely jumped into retirement pretty quickly. And just talking about that then, so did you, over the last couple of years, slowly transition, or was it actually, okay, this is the final date, and then tomorrow I'm not working here anymore?
Yep, we did it as one single day because the lease was up on our premises. So we decided to not renew that lease. So we had a date, which was November last year, when not only would we leave the building, and we had a big office with a lot of stuff to move, but also my wife's business was moving into a smaller office, and I deliberately didn't make space for myself. So there was one certain date. So I knew leading up to it that the 11th of November 2020 was the date, and it was. You work very, very hard to finalize things in a business, but also finalize things in a move. And because we've been there for 15 years, and I'm not very good at throwing things away, there was a massive amount of stuff to get out of the office. So the month leading up to the date was extremely busy. And then suddenly, the following Monday, I didn't have to get up. I didn't have anywhere I had to be by 8 o'clock. But I was pretty tired from all the previous few weeks. So there was just a sudden day. I worked one day, the following Monday I wasn't working.
Wow. And I imagine, as you said, because there's a lot to do right up to that final point. So you're probably that first week just getting over it. But a month's passed now, maybe 2 months has passed. What does that look like to sort of saying, I don't have that routine anymore. I'm not going into the office. Yeah. What does that look like?
I think it's interesting. I thought I planned for retirement reasonably well and realized looking back, I hadn't at all. I thought I got the activities that I mentioned earlier, and that would keep me busy. But actually, our year, as you call it in your book, is much, much more a challenge than I expected. I think because you've been doing something for 45 years, you've got routines, you've got deadlines, you're set. I always like to be busy. So I was certainly very, very busy at work. And then suddenly you're not. And the first few months, I actually found quite hard. And I couldn't really put my finger on why. I suppose mentally I was probably a little bit lost. I had things to do, but to me there was still quite a big vacuum.
Right.
I hadn't expected the first few months to be quite as they were. My wife was still working, my kids were working, so they'd go off and I'd have the house to myself all day. And I got bored a little bit, to be honest. So I went through a period of reflection. I even dug out all my old diaries and went through those. And I realized that what makes me most happy is being most busy. So as a result of that, I've taken on more things. So I'm doing much more work helping my wife's business. I'm doing much more of the activities that I mentioned earlier. So, for example, outside COVID time, with the referee thing, I volunteered for quite a lot of midweek school tournaments with a few of my friends, and we'll go along and referee that for the schools. So just keeping myself more busy. I thought I had a perfect mix, but I didn't have enough with hindsight.
So if you could go back those 2 years and you're planning, is there something that you could have done differently? Or I guess, yes, it's very hard to say, yep, I'm doing something or I'm not doing something, and the boredom that you're talking about. But is there some other way you thought, well, okay, here's a tip for I could have been a little bit better prepared if I'd done this?
I think if I'd been more mentally prepared for the dramatic change from working, having deadlines, having responsibilities, having staff, all that goes with that, and all the responsibility, to suddenly being 100% able to please myself, do what I wanted in the daytime. The mental side of it was what I found toughest. I don't know how you plan for that. Maybe I should have done a bit more research on it. I thought I got it covered, but obviously I hadn't. But, it never got serious. I never got depressed or anything like that, which I'm sure some people would. But having had that period, I think it's much easier now to look ahead. I know what I need to do more of. I know if there's only one thing in the week, that's going to be enough, and I'm going to get bored and difficult. Yeah. So finding lots of things that I enjoy, and I'm the sort of person, the busier I am, the happier I am.
Yeah, and I think you've raised a couple of really good points. The first one was, financially, yep. And for a lot of people, that's all they're concentrating on. I'm getting to a certain point, whether that's 60, 65, 70, that, financially I want to be set, and that's all they're aiming for. But what we're finding more and more is that people may be enjoying work and they don't want to stop, but they want to be busy. They may not want to work as hard, but financially, you just want to be able to have enough assets, enough money, enough super, so that financially you're working because you want to rather than because you're being forced to. And so, that's a tick box. But then it's your health, relationships, and your mind well-being. That's just so important. And I think at least you had sort of said, yep, there's a charity work, there's the refereeing, there's my hobbies. I've got those. But so at least you had your fallback position. And I think that's where a lot of people do, I see, is that they've just been concentrating on the financial and not those other aspects. So when they do stop, and if they do stop on a certain day, they haven't thought about those others. At least you've given yourself that those couple other areas that, yep, you didn't quite realize it'd be like this, but you knew what you had to do. And I think that's a really good lesson for all of us, that it isn't just the financial, it's that mental, your relationships. For some people, the only time they spend with each other is at night. And now they're going to be spending 24 hours a day with each other. It's pretty tough if you're not used to it. So, okay, so you've said it a few times actually about the refereeing, but just from that point of view, I actually do think being healthy is something we also don't really think a lot about when it comes to retirement. People are living longer. We know where people are going to. If they live at 65, they could have another 20, 30 years on this earth. And the one thing you want to be able to do is, if financially you're okay, is to be able to travel, enjoy yourself. The last thing you want to be able to do is not have your health to be able to do that. So tell us a bit more about from your health point of view. How often do you say you're doing it? A couple of times a week now, you're saying, the refereeing?
Oh, no, probably a bit more like 5 or 6 games a week.
Wow, okay.
So probably one school tournament one day of the week, which can be, from 8 till 4, whatever. Lots of short games, 1 or 2 evening games. Saturday, I try and mentor new refs because I have a slightly awkward knee. So I can't referee every single day, otherwise I can't walk by the end of the weekend. So Saturday, I like to mentor, which is another way of looking really at charity work. So it's trying to encourage young kids who want to be referees to help them and to give back some of the things I've learned over the years and some of the things to do and not do. And then I usually do a couple of games on a Sunday as well.
And how do you find it? How do you find, sorry, interrupting, just refereeing? Because, I've been playing soccer right through to 60, and the poor referees, they do cop abuse. And, especially referees, young people, the parents are on the sideline and they can be just as bad. So how do you actually deal with that? Because mentally that's definitely a challenge.
Yes. I mean, over the years, you just get used to it. So, when I first started refereeing, I don't know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was, some games when you got a bit of abuse, you come home and you'd be quite worried about it. And nowadays, the Referee Association is very good at helping referees because that happens to all of us occasionally. So that's why, for example, you mentor the young refs. So if they have a bad game, you can say, look, bad games happen. You make mistakes. We all make mistakes. You've got to look forward. So now, having done a lot of games, I ignore most of the comments from the sidelines and just don't worry about it. It doesn't bother me. Yeah. As long as I know I've tried my best and been as fair as I possibly can, then at the end of the day, I'm happy. But one rule I do have, I won't referee the men over 45. I avoid that age group because they are the worst. They all think they know the rules, and the rules keep changing every year. They all think that their bodies are better than they are. So the mind sees them going for a ball, and the body means they're 2 minutes late and takes somebody out as a result. And then they abuse us for that. So I won't do men over 45s anymore.
No, I think that's quite wise for playing over 45s for 15 years. It's a struggle. I get that. Okay, it's interesting. The retirement, the actual health, the actual mental side of it. But actually going back just to the financial, that was interesting. You did say that there was a point, I wanted to get to have enough so that you would be retire with comfort. Did you have advisors along the way? I know you've never had your own financial advisor because you take an interest in this yourself. I know you're very well versed on share market and all this, and really do see this as probably a part-time hobby for yourself. But obviously, you still would have had mentors, coaches in this financially. A bit about that?
Yes. I think it's very important to get the right advice because you don't suddenly know everything about the financial market. It's very complicated. And if you go in with your eyes too open and not really having the right help or advice, you can easily make mistakes, which then put you off. So I think I've always had an interest in business. So I always watch, after the ABC News, there's the business on ABC News, which is great. Gives you an update of the day. I've always had a very good interest in the share market. And one of the things I did very early on the advice of my accountant, was start a self-managed super fund when they were very, very new. And he said to us, start now, just put a little away, and then add to it when you can. And the effects of compounding, one thing he always recommended is always reinvest dividends, never take dividends out, and the general growth of the share market. We've done that, but I still kept an interest in a lot of ways of getting better advice. So I used to subscribe to quite a lot of share newsletters with their recommendations. Some they got right, some they got wrong, but that's the same as me. Some I got right, some I got wrong. But the way they analysed companies, and how they looked at companies and what were the key metrics to think about, that was very, very good training. I did a couple of courses. I did one of the famous American Anthony Robbins did a money mastery course for 4 or 5 days, which was an eye-opener into the American way of looking at finance. So I did quite a lot of research and training, and it's an area that generally interests me.
Yeah, and I know, because we've often talked about this in the past, like one of my, and it will be a topic for a future podcast, is borrowing to buy assets, but buying good assets, not bad assets. Buying an investment property, borrowing for a share portfolio or a property, rather than borrowing for the best car or the best boat. Assets that don't provide an income. You definitely have believed to that and subscribe to that as well. I know you have an investment property, and that's done very well for you.
Yes, I've actually been, you might not want to hear this, I've actually been very much anti-debt. I think growing up when I did, and with parents who didn't have a lot, you're kind of taught directly and indirectly that debt is a bad thing. Sometimes you have to do it. So I remember saving up for deposit to buy my first car and taking on a personal loan for my first car, which was a absolutely useless Fiat 127. I'm sure they never make them anymore. And then paying it back. But my philosophy was, if you have a debt, try and pay it back as quickly as you can. So the same as when we bought our house, you have a mortgage, try and get that down as quickly as you can. Debt is necessary at times, but I think some of the young people today think debt is quite normal, and then they get hit by high interest rates on credit cards or things like that, which if they planned a little bit better, they wouldn't necessarily need to do.
Yeah, I think, and I absolutely, a lot of people have the same belief and get taught that. And funny enough, my parents, especially my mother, had exactly the same view about getting into debt and all this. And I think that's where it is. And I think that's going to be a nice segue into, we've both got millennial age children and the concerns we have with the debt levels they can have. But I do think it's one of those things. Debt can be a good thing if you're using it for the right reason.
Yes.
If you had to sort of pay for a $500,000 unit, it'd take you 10 years to save up that, maybe 10, 15 years to save up for that $500,000 unit. And by the time you get there, it'll be $1 million. So debt can be used for the right reasons, can help you get into an asset now that's there. So it's definitely, but there is definitely bad debt and high credit cards. And I think one of the big differences from when we grew up, when there was no ATMs, there wasn't the easy access to cash or, more importantly, debt. Now there's Afterpay and all these other things that if you have this level of debt, and there has been some statistics around that, the average 25-year-old already has $5,000 credit card debt, and that's just way too high. So is there any tips that you've done for helping your own, you've got 3 boys, that you've helped with them, with their money education? Because to a lot of us, helping our kids get a good financial start to life is very important.
Totally. And I think it's much harder for kids today. On the positive side, they have access to many, many more things than my generation had. But my generation was able to really look forward and say, if you worked hard, if you tried hard, and you had a reasonably good job, then you could quite happily dream about having a house, having a car, things like that. I think the generation today in their early 20s and so on look forward and look at the housing market and think, will I ever be able to afford a house? And even when they've got reasonably good jobs and they're getting paid reasonably well and they're mature about how they approach their attitude to money, even so, it's very, very tough to see them when you can't buy a house for less than whatever it is, 1.4 million in Sydney, whatever the magic figure is now.
Yes.
The number of times you'd have to earn the annual, you would know the right phrase for this, the
multiple.
Sorry?
The multiple, annual salary multiple.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, when we were younger, it was probably, 5 to 10. Now it's probably, 10 to 30.
Yeah,
and
closer to 30.
Closer to 30 is, okay, well, that makes a massive difference.
Mm.
So the generation today have it harder in many respects, particularly when it comes to things like housing. If they've got good salaries, good jobs, then the day-to-day things they can afford. So they can afford a car, they can afford a nice holiday and things like that. But the really big thing, particularly house, is beyond the reach of most of them. And having got children in that age group, they're very much looking to the parents to help, or they're deciding how to split up the assets where we've still got hopefully quite a few years to go, because it's the only way they're ever going to be able to buy a house.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting. We've run seminars and webinars for 25 to 30-year-olds, and it is still quite interesting that property is still the main topic they love to hear about. So that whole philosophy, or when we were growing up, buy that quarter block, get your home. Property is still very important to this generation. The one clear difference that we find is that a lot of them talk about, well, we're not going to be in the job for the next 40 years, or see that one career is that we, millennials Gen X's, Gen Ys feel like, well, maybe 10 years in a career is enough, and then I'll change careers and may change countries, which is just, that's the way it is. But property is something that they're still interested in, but more like an investment property rather than their own home. So they still see buying good property, good assets like property, but it's not going to tie them down to that place for the next 40 years. And I think that's a good way to be. I don't mind that at all, because one of those things is, as you say, you know, if you're 25 and the property in your local areas on average is 1.5 million, how are you ever going to save up for a 20% deposit? But you could buy a unit somewhere for 500,000, which is quite affordable. You rent where you are, and at least you've got some asset growing in the background. And over a period of 20, 30 years, that might be 2, 3, 4 investment properties. So there's a few different ways to get there to retire comfortably. But I just see, the thinking for this age group, definitely the millennials is, they want property. It just may not be where they want to live.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, actually. Very good point. Because, you know, we all know that if you rent for all your life and then you retire, you haven't got your biggest asset that most other people have. What you just suggested through investment properties is a different way of doing it, which is more akin to the way the world is today. And I think that's very smart.
If you're looking back at where you're saying about retirement, is there something now you feel 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that you're already starting to think about, okay, I've retired, the next big stage? Is it something you're thinking about estate planning? It's obviously too early for aged care, but it must be something that, you know, where I want to travel for the next 10 years, but what's happening after that? Have you started to think about where I'm at this next stage? What does that look like in 5 or 10 years from now?
I've looked at the positive side of that, Mark, not the estate planning or the aged care quite yet.
Okay.
But as I mentioned earlier, when I first retired and had a period of reflection, one thing that came out of that was I wrote a fairly detailed bucket list of the places I really like to go, both here and overseas. And that would be a very big priority for the next few years, to literally cross off the things I really want to do on my bucket list. Now I've got the time.
What's your top 3, John?
Top priority, more travel.
Okay, let's go further. Travel where?
I want to go back to the UK, which is where I'm from. I haven't been back there now for 7 or 8 years. So I've got a lot of friends and family that I haven't seen for a while. But when you're working, you know, when we've gone back in the past, it's been for 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever. And my wife used to say when we'd been there, we'd charge around seeing my friends and family, we'd get back, she'd say, that wasn't a holiday. We just charged around seeing people. We didn't actually relax, unwind, or anything else. And she's quite right. So one thing I would like to do is go for an extended period and be able to spend more time with the people that I've known for a very long time, and also see some of the things that with hindsight, you know, I probably should have done. For many years, I worked just around the corner from Hampton Court Palace, and I never actually went in. I went in the grounds for a walk a few times, but never actually went in the palace. And I read a book about it a couple of years ago, and the place is fascinating.
Right.
So even though I lived around the corner from it for a long time, never went in, I'd love to do those sort of things and go back and spend a day or two just going inside, delving through it. Now I know the background and the history.
Yeah, I think there's a point where, you know, those trips seeing 10 countries in 20 days is gone. You just want to be able to sit back and relax. And if you don't want to go anywhere that day, you just want to relax and just take in the local community culture, that's what you want to do. Now, I totally understand that. You've actually talked about the old country, if I can call it that.
Yes.
One of the things, though, and you're saying about talking about the positives, and I get that, but it is something that we all, as part of the sandwich generation, we talked about the kids, but we're talking about our parents. Now, I do remember there was a tough period of time for you when your father passed away or was ill, and you were back and forth from the UK and doing as much as you can. If you're having to say, look at that and say, there's some lessons learned, I don't want my children to go through the same issues, whether it's we didn't get things organised by the time my father passed or mother passed, and I wish I could have done this before they passed to make our lives and their lives easier. Is there something on those that you would have said lessons learned when that period happened for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. So my mother passed away when I was relatively young. So my father was on his own for quite a long time. And as it started to get to the stage where we needed to think about his future, then we needed to have what you call in your book the conversation,
Right.
which is a very, very important concept. So we did. We didn't have it quite as formally as you suggest in the book, and that's perhaps one lesson. What we did is we talked with him. I talked with my brother and sister, and we decided that he would give us power of attorney to all three of us, which he did. We helped him get his will up to date, and we found out in detail about his own financial situation. So we thought, yeah, that's all sorted. Then unexpected things happen. My brother and sister are not very financially savvy, and they didn't quite understand how a power of attorney should work. So they thought it was great fun to give some money away to some things that they thought Dad would like to, and spend a bit of money on themselves and so on. And suddenly his bank balance was going down fairly dramatically. So we then had a different type of conversation, and that was, it's Dad's money and he gets to spend it how he wants, not how you think he would want. He's still got his marbles, and so we need to think about this quite differently. And the net result of that conversation is that we took away the power of attorney from my brother and my sister, and it was an unbelievable win-win. They were very relieved because they found it quite stressful to have to worry about looking after somebody else's money. My father was relieved because the money was not going down or going out the window quite so quickly. And I was relieved because he and I always got on very, very well. And so it was very easy for me to talk to him and find out what he wanted and then be able to plan it with him and later on for him to look after him. So I think there's always unexpected things, particularly with siblings. They weren't being naughty or malicious. It was just not an area where they had any expertise. And it could have led to a very difficult situation. So when he eventually went into an aged care home, at least we could afford it, but through selling his house. But if we hadn't done the things that we'd done in the last couple of years, it would have been much, much more difficult.
Yeah, you've raised a good point there. I do see it quite often that the people who do get all the, let's actually take a step back. Unfortunately, there's not enough people who get their wills, power of attorneys organised. But for the ones who do, it's having the right people for the right jobs is really important. And I do see it, from a parent's point of view, saying, well, I've got 2 children, I've got 3 children. Of course, I'm going to give all the children or all the kids power of attorney because I want to be fair, just like my will probably split it up equally amongst them. But it's actually not the best use of usually, because you're right, everyone is a different personality. Some are going to be quite fine, be very pragmatic, and some, this will be an emotional toll and very stressful for them. And so parents do need, from their point of view, decide when doing this, who's the right child. It's not picking favorites. Every child has their own unique way, but for this sort of thing, you do need someone who's very pragmatic. And if it's going to cause stress, then you do need to think twice about it. That's actually a really good piece. So thank you. Thanks for that, John. So we seem to have covered quite a lot. Is there anything else you think, okay, in this period I'm in, or the period, the next big challenge, that you sort of think that, yep, we haven't discussed, that surprised you even about this period of your life at the moment?
Yeah, I think the other one was the situation related to my mother-in-law, who passed away last year. But 3 or 4 years ago, she was then in her 90s, and we had to start discussing the future with her and have the conversation. And we checked out some nursing homes for her and so on. And the situation I found was actually very complex. It's not an area I knew much about. So we were recommended a very good financial advisor who specialised in aged care. And we only had a couple of meetings with him, but he clarified an awful lot for us and presented us with a very clear plan going forward of what would be best for her and how it would work and how it would change over time. And we went through that with her, which she was very, very happy with. So I think in areas where it's complex, and aged care these days is very complex, with having to work out assessments and all the 4 or 5 different ways that you can play for nursing care to work out the best one for the individual person. I think finding an expert, it's not an area I spend any time in. I'm not an expert in that area. But the 2 or 3 sessions we had with this one advisor were very, very useful for us and for my mother-in-law.
Yeah, no, I think from being a financial advisor for over 30 years, what I really like that's happening in the profession is that advisors are starting to specialize, and aged care is something that I looked at for a while, and it just didn't suit my personality. I just found that really a tough conversation, and yet there's wonderful people out there, advisors, who I would refer my clients to if exactly the same situation, because it's just a minefield. Anyone who's tried to do aged care themselves, they just realize how much of a struggle it is. And that's just the actual paperwork, actually physically comparing and going out to looking at the different aged care homes is such a struggle. Actually, one thing on that, and it's got nothing to do with them. I just found them. Care 360 is an app that actually is online, compares different aged care facilities. So for anyone out there wanting age, it's worth checking out. But I think that's what we'll need. Technology will have to help get the whole aged care sector better, because it is such a minefield at the moment, and getting good advice. So thank you for that, John. We've pretty well run out of time. One thing we are asking all our guests, which we call the final bite, is what's probably the best piece of advice you've heard in your life? It doesn't have to be financial, just probably the best piece of advice that you would want to pass on to your sons, for example.
I think from my accountant many years ago, when he said to me, start thinking about the future now and start investing as soon as you can, even with very, very small amounts, which is how we started. Because over many years, you do see the effect of compounding, the effect of dividend reinvestment, the growth of the share market. And by putting even quite small sums away at a relatively good age, 30s, early 40s, whatever, by the time you do reach retirement age, that can have grown to quite a substantial nest egg that can give you that financial confidence to then do the other things that you want to do in retirement.
Excellent piece of advice. Yep. No, compounding interest, it sounds like it is the one thing that does get taught at school, but most people don't really fully understand. But it is just starting now, putting a little bit aside and letting time and interest build you a nest egg. So no, that's a very good piece of advice. So thank you for that. Well, thanks, John, actually, for being part of the show. I'm sure some of your insights, especially for me, what really resonated was it's just not the financial. When it comes to retirement, you do need to think your health, relationships, and that next big mental challenge for your own well-being. And hopefully the listeners resonated with them too, and maybe put on their own to-do list as approaching retirement for themselves. So thanks, John, and look forward to speaking next time from a bite from the Money Sandwich. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Mark. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
John also spoke about giving back and being part of some great charities and neighbourhood programs, including Stand Tall. If you want to know more about this great charity and their events, you can go to their website, standtallevent.com. Thanks again for listening, and if you have any questions or want to find out more about our retirement coaching and other services, please visit our website, themoneysandwich.com. See you next time when we take another bite from the Money Sandwich.